of the book of Genesis, we find a story of a man named Jacob. Now, Jacob was a twin. His twin brother was named Esau, and Esau was the firstborn between the two. And so Esau, when they were old enough, Esau was the one to receive the inheritance from his father. Now, when they become of age to receive this inheritance, Jacob is convinced by his mother to deceive his father into giving it to him instead of Esau. And so Esau, being a hairy man, goes off to go hunt for food to bring it back to his father. And while he's doing that, Jacob dresses up like Esau. And so he puts on the sheepskin to mimic his hairiness. And so he goes up to his father Isaac and pretends to be Esau and steals his birthright. And so Isaac gives Jacob Esau's entire inheritance. And so Jacob walks away with the inheritance, and Esau comes to Isaac asking Isaac for his inheritance. And Isaac asks Esau, "Who are you? I just gave your inheritance away." And Isaac, realizing that he had given his inheritance to Jacob, apologizes to Esau, but reminds him that there's nothing that he can do, and he has to simply serve his brother. And it's not until Esau can break the yoke of his brother off his neck that he will be able to forgive and move on with life. And so Esau runs away into the wilderness, alone, afraid, and bitter, and so angry at his brother for taking his birthright. And Jacob, proud, arrogant, and Jacob, the deceiver, goes off to find a wife. And so Jacob goes to one of his relatives, distant relatives named Laban. And while he's going to his distant relative named Laban, he finds out he has a daughter named Rachel who's very beautiful, and so he wants to marry her. Now Laban tells Jacob that he can marry her if he works for him for 7 years. And so Jacob does that because Rachel was very beautiful and he really wanted her to be his wife. And so he works for Laban for 7 years. And so they go to the wedding and they're getting married, and then they have a party and they have their wedding night. And in the morning when he wakes up, he realizes that he did not marry Rachel. And instead, he was tricked into marrying the older daughter, Leah. And so Jacob, in his anger, goes up to Laban and says, "Hey man, I worked 7 years for Rachel, and this isn't Rachel, this is Leah. Like, how could you do this to me?" And in this moment, Jacob realizes that the tables have kind of turned, that instead of him being the deceiver, he was now being deceived. And so Laban wants to smooth things over, and he says, "Hey man, like I couldn't have had my younger daughter married when my older daughter wasn't married. So, I had you marry her first." And so he says, "Well, if you work another 7 years for me, I'll give you Rachel. But I'll tell you what, you don't have to work the 7 years first. You can marry Rachel and then work the 7 years for me." So a few days later, he marries Rachel, and he works another 7 years for Laban. And eventually, Jacob ends up having 12 sons between 4 different women. Yeah, 4 different women. Talk about a complicated family. So he has 12 sons with 4 women. And there's one son in particular that he really loves a lot more than the rest. And his name is Joseph. And all his brothers knew that Joseph was the favored son. And there was one day where Jacob gives his son Joseph this really fancy, nice Gucci coat. I'm just kidding. It wasn't Gucci, but it might as well have been. And so all the brothers are jealous of Joseph. They hate him. They want to kill him. And so they decide to do that. They want to murder him. And so they go to throw him down a well. But instead of doing that, they decide killing him was a little bit too far. So they sell him into slavery. And so Joseph is now taken into a foreign land called Egypt, where he is made a slave. And then eventually is put into prison. And then from prison, he's put into the Pharaoh's palace. And in the Pharaoh's palace, he's eventually, a long time down the road, made a second in command over all of Egypt, where he eventually completely saves the entire entire nation of Egypt from famine. And even his brothers and his father Jacob from famine. Yeah, he saves his entire family, the family that deceived him, from famine. And at the end of all the story, Joseph realizes that he was supposed to forgive them, that God was going to turn the bad situation into a good situation. And through the whole entire mess of this family of Jacob, God is still faithful. God still carries out his promise through him. And eventually, the line of Jesus comes from Jacob. in his family. So if you have a messed up family, hey, Jacob did too, and God was able to do something good with that. So
what's going on, guys? I want to tell you a story that can be found in Luke chapter 15. I think it starts in verse 11, and it's about these two sons and a father. And this father and this family is pretty well off, and the younger son asks his dad if he can have his inheritance early. And so the father, being the father he was, says, "Of course, son, you can have your inheritance. Here you go." And so he gives him all the inheritance early before the father passes away, before it was time to do so. And the young son goes off and he does whatever he wants to do. He parties, gets all the luxurious items of the world, and he finds himself one day without anything. Actually, even worse, he finds himself in a pig pen and eating the scraps from the pigs, and basically helpless, hopeless. Doesn't really think that there's anywhere he can go. He had the wrong outlook on life. He probably made a wrong decision, but nevertheless, he has a thought one day and says, maybe if I go back to my father's house, I'll be able to, at least be a servant or something. Surely even the servants in my father's house are more well off than I am right now, eating in the pig pens. And so he takes opportunity, takes a chance on this, and he goes with his father. He goes back to his father's house, and his father surprisingly sees him far off, and he says, "You know what? I love my son so much that I'm gonna forget everything that happened, and I'm gonna embrace him." So he embraces him, and he puts his robe and a ring on his finger, and he has a big party, and he welcomes his son back into the family. The older son, kind of frustrated with this, kind of upset that this would take place. "Dad, my younger brother squandered everything. I don't get it." And the father says, "You know what? He's my son. I have to take him back. I have to love him no matter what." And I think this is a good representation of our Father in heaven, and how family, regardless of the father you have here, how family should look like. We should be loving each other. We should be taking care of each other. We should be even as far off to say as when people treat us the way his son treated him, when things go the way his son had them go, and when life takes place in those ways, we should still, as family, regardless of if it's your son or if it's your grandpa, your mom, your dad, your aunt, your uncle, whatever it is, a family should take care of each other no matter what. And I think this is a good representation of what it means to be a family, is that no matter what, unconditionally, well, we're going to love each other. So I hope that helps you guys understand not just how we should be treating each other, but also how our Father looks at us. No matter what you do, He's going to be there for you.